When I was around Mrs. Ford, what always struck me was how so many incredible things could happen to one person, from suburban life to the White House in a space of 10 months, and still leave her unchanged. Through it all, she kept her bearings. Across the years, she was the same candid and completely unpretentious woman.
Lynn Cheney from the funeral today. We've all been talking a lot about Betty Ford's life as First Lady, the impact that she had on many people's lives, and we'll concentrate on how she helped people struggling with addiction in just a moment.
But first, let's look back at the First Lady's life before she met Gerald Ford. Betty Ford, officially Elizabeth Ann Bloomer, was born on April 8th, 1918 in Chicago, but raised in Grand Rapids. Her father was a factory parts salesman who died when she was just 16 years old. As a young girl in Grand Rapids, Betty fell in love with dance and studied it for years. She eventually became a member of the dance troupe that performed at Carnegie Hall in New York City. She returned to Grand Rapids, though, in 1941 and worked at a department store in the downtown, Herpolsheimer's. A year later, she married a salesman, William Warren, but they divorced a few years later. She met would-be President Gerald Ford in 1947.
Betty Ford's battle for her sobriety became a public one and eventually helped millions overcome their own addictions. 24 Hour News 8's Mark Thompson has a closer look.
Over the years, I've had the privilege to work with many different women's projects, but I will have to admit that probably the thing that is closest to my heart is the Betty Ford Center, and that is my pride and joy.
She was our nation's first lady, but it was after she left the White House that the name Betty Ford became even more famous for the list of famous people treated in the California Addiction Center bearing her name. Betty Ford went public with her addiction to alcohol and prescription drugs in the late 1970s. She was forced to come to grips with her disease after an unstable narration of Peter and the Wolf in the Soviet Union that was broadcast before the world. That led to a family intervention led by her daughter Susan and her husband, former President Gerald Ford. After initial resistance, she checked herself into a Long Beach Naval Rehabilitation Facility in 1978. But Betty didn't keep her struggles with addiction under wraps. Instead, she let the world in.
And at that time, I knew very little about my disease, and I certainly never imagined that I'd become a spokesperson in educating the public about alcoholism. Somehow, it wasn't a career role or her career goal.
And eventually she agreed to lend her name to the Betty Ford Center, which opened in California in 1982. It's a story that so many people dealing with the same issues can relate to, and Betty's courage as a public figure to come forward is still having a profound impact on the lives of others, even now after her death.
She inspired me to help myself.
We caught up with Yolanda Baldwin at the Ford Museum as she signed Betty Ford's condolence book. Baldwin is recovering from alcohol addiction and says the former First Lady's story inspired her to seek treatment.
When she began her help in clinic for alcohol and drug addiction, you know, that helped me with a woman that's high in prestige, knows how women feel when we're that low, when we addicted to something that hurt in our life and affected our life so bad that we feel like we can't pull ourselves up. She encouraged me, being a woman with so much high in authority of prestige, to I can make a comeback. And I really appreciated her for that.
Betty Ford's work also helped shape a major change in the way addiction is viewed, diagnosed, and treated.
A lot of things can happen even in a room just like this. A lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of fears, a lot of sadness, and all of those things are a part of the recovery process.
John Wildryer is clinic manager at Pine Rest Christian Mental Health Services. He credits Betty Ford with helping to significantly reduce the stigma of addiction.
I think Betty Ford went a long way in helping the United States understand that this is a disease like any other. It's a chronic disease like diabetes or heart disease, and it is a chronic condition, meaning it needs to be managed over the rest of the person's life.
Andy says that Betty Ford's public passion went a long way to shed light on treatment facilities that were often subpar and run only by addicts themselves.
What she said and did made a huge impact on our society as a whole.
And there are none more grateful than the actual people whose lives she's touched and changed.
You know, she let us know we can get fixed when we're broken.
That was Mark Thompson reporting. That brings us to the end of our program tonight. Our coverage will, of course, continue here at 11 o'clock on Wood TV 8. Make sure and join us for that.
On behalf of all of us here at 24 Hour News 8, we would like to thank you for tuning in and participating in all of our coverage this past week.
It has certainly been an honor. Thank you so much for inviting us into your home and sharing this historical moment with us. Thank you and good night.
If you give yourself to making the best of your role in life, you'll find a great deal of happiness. You can be anything you want to be.
She was a tireless advocate for those struggling. She was a leader in the fight for women's rights, and she was so warm and friendly.
You know, she let us know we can get fixed when we're broken.
Not only First Lady of our country, but First Lady of our city, and very important that we honor her in a very, very special way.
The dimensions of her life weren't extraordinary in one way. They were extraordinary in every way.
Lord, you gave her the voice and the courage to use it. Because Betty was humble but strong, vulnerable and courageous, we are better people.
She was the one with the love and the comfort, and she was the first one there to put her arms around you. And then the country and the world got to see her love.
But for the rest of our days, we will cherish all that was and be thankful that we knew and loved Betty and Jerry Ford.
I mean, she's been such an advocate for us.
All of us are supremely better for having known you, Betty. You'll never know how much we miss you.
May I say to all of my countless friends in Western Michigan, Betty and I are deeply grateful for your long and wonderful support. It's great to be home again. Thank you very, very much.